Hello, I'm Clarisse Fortuné. Welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. We start with the headlines. Confusion, anger. People in Liberia react after Donald Trump praised the English skills of President Joseph Boakai. Such good English, Trump said to Boakai at the White House. English has been Liberia's official language since the 1800s. Human rights groups say the Tunisian president is using the judiciary to target political opponents. Most opposition leaders, some journalists and critics of Kais Saied have been imprisoned or are on trial since Saied seized control of most powers. Botswana, Ghana, Mauritius. In 2024, many incumbent leaders lost elections and walked away with grace. Could this signal a new chapter for democracy? We'll discuss this with our guest, who says gracious losers are a win for democracy. President Donald Trump sparked confusion in Liberia after praising the English skills of President Joseph Boakai during a White House meeting. An exchange that raised eyebrows, particularly since English has been Liberia's official language since the 1800s. The comments came as Trump met with 5 African leaders, signaling a shift in U.S. foreign policy from aid to trade. First, let's go back to this exchange.
Well, thank you. And such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully? Where were you educated? Where?
Yes, sir.
In Liberia.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting. It's beautiful English.
Sure.
I have people at this table can't speak nearly as well.
Very good, sir. Thank you.
And this awkward moment received mixed reactions, anger, confusion. But despite the discomfort, many residents of Liberia or Senegal believe it could ultimately work in their favor. Laurent Berstecher has more.
A day after the meeting between Donald Trump and Bassirou Diomaye Faye, Dakar residents reacted with mixed impressions to their president's showing.
C'est une opportunité, ça va faire une promotion pour le Sénégal et en plus ça va rassurer les investisseurs.
Bon, espérons que ça sera fructueux pour le Sénégal. Mais s'il s'agit de voyager seulement pour voyager et de ne rien régler, c'est pas l'appel aussi.
Faye was one of 5 African heads of state to meet with Donald Trump on Wednesday. The leaders of Liberia, Mauritania, Gabon and Guinea-Bissau all jostled to impress the American president, speaking at length about their respective countries' abundance of natural resources and calling on U.S. companies to invest. But it was something else that caught Donald Trump's eye as he complimented President Joseph Boakai's, quote, beautiful English, seemingly unaware it was Liberia's official language. While many Monrovia residents decried the scene as condescending or even humiliating, others thought Trump's praise reflected positively on the country.
Maybe Trump thought that Boakai got educated in the Western world. But then we all got to know that Boakai came from the grassroots in Liberia and he went to school here. So to tell you that Liberians are brilliant people.
According to several sources, Trump also pressed the 5 heads of state to agree to take in deported migrants. But so far, no country has officially responded to the proposal.
In Tunisia, the pace of political trials is rapidly increasing. Commentator and lawyer Sonia Damani is currently serving nearly 5 years in prison after being convicted of false news charges in 3 different cases. She faces 2 more cases pending the trial. Several political figures were also convicted in a high-profile case involving an alleged conspiracy against state security, receiving sentences ranging from 12 to 35 years. These convictions have left many concerned about the implications for justice and political freedom in Tunisia. Lilia Blaise and Hamdi Tlili report.
At the appeals court in Tunis, Nafa La-Aribi, a lawyer for political opposition figure Abir Moussi, awaits her hearing. Moussi, the president of the Free Desturian Party, has been in prison since October 2023 on trial in several cases. Most notably, she's been accused of attempting an attack with the aim of changing the government. The defense rejects the accusation and has taken it to a higher court before trial.
We feel there is an acceleration. I can't think of a logical explanation except that the authorities want to close these cases and prove them guilty, so we no longer talk about them.
In the end, the appeal is rejected. Other opposition figures are still waiting for their cases to be heard, such as Ahmed Swab, a lawyer imprisoned since April 2025 under the anti-terrorism law for claiming that the judiciary lacks independence. His family prepares a food basket and brings it to him each week, waiting for news.
What's hard in our current situation is the arbitrariness. My father could be facing this for a month, a few days, a year, 2 years, 3 years, we don't know.
The pressure is high even for Tunisian opposition figures in exile. Former minister and center-left politician Ghazi Chouechi is currently serving an 18-year prison sentence for conspiring against state security. One of his sons, Elias, an opponent of President Kais Saied, was recently assaulted in France by 2 Tunisians who accused him of criticizing the president.
The current regime accuses opponents of treason. The president practices hate speech against every person who criticizes him, so it inevitably encourages these kinds of excesses.
Elias Chouechi filed a lawsuit in France. In Tunisia, he's facing 5 legal cases, 3 of them under the anti-terrorism law because of criticism he voiced on social media.
Now, African politics often make headlines for coups and democratic backsliding, leading many to believe that democracy on the continent is in decline. However, not everyone is on the same page. Francis Brown, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, presents a different narrative, the emergence of gracious losers. In her recent article, she points out that in 2024 alone, several incumbent leaders not only lost elections, but did so with dignity, paving the way for peaceful transitions of power. We are joined by Francis Brown herself. Welcome, Francis. So your article highlights a series of peaceful transitions in Africa in 2024, Botswana, Ghana, to name a few. Is this a turning point for democracy, or are these gracious concessions isolated exceptions?
Is a trend. So my co-author Margot Treadwell and I talk about how last year it was quite a watershed year for opposition victories, as you said, and important handovers. So we saw opposition victories in Botswana, Ghana, Senegal, and Mauritius. These are not the first opposition handovers and gracious concessions in African history. Certainly, we profile some of the recent history examples as well, including in Liberia and Nigeria. But it was quite a watershed year. And so that's why we think it's an important trend to watch going forward.
So you mentioned Botswana's ruling party losing after nearly 6 decades in power. So what made that transition stand out to you?
I think Botswana is a really interesting example of this. Was a liberation party that had been in power for almost 60 years, and it lost the election. We also saw liberation parties lose ground in Namibia and in South Africa, although they did not fully lose the election. And I think this says, as you well know, Africa is a very young continent, and many young voters are ready for something new, don't necessarily have the same sense of allegiance to previous liberation parties as past generations.
So what do you think about the dominant perception that there's actually a democratic decline on the continent?
So there is compelling research about democratic decline globally. So Freedom House, the international NGO, has charted 19 years of democratic backsliding globally. They've charted democratic backsliding in Africa. That is all still true. Afrobarometer, a very respected research organization on the continent, has talked about how many Africans have declining support for democracy. They don't feel that democracy is delivering materially for what they need. So that is all true, and yet the picture is complicated. We thought it was important to also bring to light some positive trends like these gracious concessions and handovers, and that's what we aim to do in our article.
So in this positive trend, do you think that regional actors like ECOWAS or the African Union played a role?
Absolutely. I think regional actors have a huge role to play and have historically played positive roles. So AU and ECOWAS often send election observation missions. Often their leaders engage with the candidates, try to set expectations for a peaceful election, for a handover if that's what's needed. Also, supporters outside of the region sometimes help, including by offering gracious losers fellowships at universities, including by giving them a spotlight and a platform for their expertise. So there's ways in which actors inside and outside of the region can be helpful in supporting gracious losers.
So what side, like for example, there are coming elections in October, I'm giving you an example of Cameroon and Ivory Coast. So what sign should we be looking for to tell whether this trend is continuing or not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching these eagerly as well. I think both Cameroon and Ivory Coast, and then the other upcoming elections, including in Tanzania, Seychelles, Malawi. In all of these, I'm looking at whether the opposition can campaign freely. There's some wide variation there, whether the opposition can coalesce, whether they'll come together, and whether there's public spotlight on how the incumbents are comporting themselves. I will not be the person to predict how any of these elections will turn out or what an incumbent might do if they do lose. But I do think it's important that we all pay very close attention to what is possible and that gracious handovers and gracious concessions are in the realm of possible going forward.
And there's also, let's not forget, the role of institutions like electoral bodies that can play a role as well.
Absolutely, and there's been a lot of learning on that. I think it's notable that several of the elections last year, the losing incumbent conceded even before the electoral body had announced the final results. So that's a notable trend to watch going forward as well.
Thank you very much, Frances Brown, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you very much to present this different,
Thank you so much.
This different narrative about democracy in Africa. Now, the World Food Programme said they had airdropped food aid to help tens of thousands of people in remote parts of South Sudan, where a recent surge in fighting has pushed some communities to the brink of famine. Laurent Bersecher has more.
Dropping from the sky, dozens of hefty white bags come crashing down on a field before being distributed to families in need. It was the first time in 4 months that World Food Programme rations were able to reach South Sudan's remote Upper Nile state, where the majority of the population now lives on the brink of famine.
Livelihoods have been destroyed, people have been displaced, and now people are at a real risk of famine because of the conflict. These airdrops that we've started over the last couple of days are crucial and critical to push back that risk and bring people back from the brink of famine.
Tensions have flared in South Sudan since Vice President Riek Machar was arrested in March, sparking fears the country could be plunged into another full-blown civil war. Tens of thousands of people were displaced by the fighting in recent months and have been left unable to fend for themselves. In the northeastern Upper Nile state, which is only accessible by aerial route, over 1 million people are now facing acute hunger according to the United Nations and depend on humanitarian aid to survive.
It's very stressful to see that my children have nothing to eat. I tried to collect firewood to sell, but the situation was so difficult that my children and myself all fell ill.
The World Food Programme said its recent airdrops should deliver life-saving nutrition assistance to over 40,000 people. A drop in the ocean, as nearly 8 million South Sudanese are currently facing crisis levels of hunger.
And let's give you the latest on Caster Semenya, the South African's runner. A win, but not the final word for Caster Semenya. Europe's top human rights court says Swiss judges failed to properly hear her appeal against rules that barred her from competing unless she lowered her natural testosterone. The ruling doesn't scrap those regulations, but it keeps Semenya's legal fight alive. Now off the track and coaching, the Olympic champion says this is no longer about medals, it's about human rights and protecting athletes like her.
Obviously, the outcome of it's great for me, great for the athletes. I mean, the most important part about this is that we remain, victorious. We stay focused. We stay, up all the time, and we make sure that athletes are protected. I think that's our main goal.
And this concludes our program. Thank you for watching Eye on Africa on France 24.
After 20 years of delays, the Grand Egyptian